Today, we are chatting about single trunk trees versus multi-trunk trees and why you would pick one over the other. Let's go. So we're doing things a little bit different today. I'm at my drafting table. As you can see, I have my coffee and a blank piece of paper in front of me, which are two things that make me very happy. I'll be doing a little sketch on this, which I will show you guys a little bit later. But first, let's talk about this multi-trunk versus single trunk, and let's just kick things off by defining what those things are. It's always helpful to first start with the basics and then go on from there. We're not gonna get into tree genetics and all that palaver. We're just gonna keep it very on the level, easy to understand, so you guys can make good decisions for your landscape. All right, let's start off with the term single trunk. And by logical deduction, yeah, you probably guessed it, it is a tree that has one single trunk coming straight out of the ground. Think of kind of like a lollipop. You have a stem and then you have the lollipop on top. Kind of what kids start drawing when they first start drawing trees. Now, jumping over to multi-trunk. I'm sure you've guessed it again. It is a tree that has multiple stems or trunks coming out of the base. Now, there's a couple different reasons why a tree might have multiple trunks at the base. Growers will sometimes intentionally bunch seedlings together to create a multi-stemmed tree. And one example of this would be a white birch. The bark on the white birch is incredibly desirable, and therefore you want to show it off and highlight it. So the more trunks you have, the more it's going to stand out. Thus, a multi-trunk specimen might be the most desirable for that particular specimen. Or the nursery might prune a tree with a single leader to become a multi-stem tree. They also might let branching begin a foot or two up from the ground, which is referred to as low branching. It's almost like this hybrid between a single trunk and a multi-trunk. One thing to note, oftentimes the multi-trunk tree will be significantly shorter than the standard trunk tree. And that's generally due to the fact that you have more branching and more foliage and just more tree for the root system to support. So it's not gonna grow as rapidly as a single trunk tree would, where it just has one stem and a single canopy at the top to provide nutrients to. With that said, a multi-trunk tree isn't necessarily something that the nursery specifically cultivates to be a multi-trunk. Sometimes they just do that on their own. There are many trees that are multi-trunked or multi-stemmed in nature, so they'll automatically do that. And a great example of that is the Marina strawberry tree. By nature, these trees want to produce multiple stems at the base. And this is one tree that can actually be sold as a multi-trunk or a single trunk. And the nurseries will generally decide what they want to do when they're young. Are they going to keep them as a multi-trunk, or are they going to prune them up when they're young to create a single trunk? Olive trees are actually another great example of a tree that wants to be multiple stemmed in nature. But oftentimes nurseries will trim them up to create a single trunk specimen. But I don't know, I just prefer seeing the unique natural multi-trunk that has so much character and beauty to it. But both are desirable for different purposes, which we're gonna talk about in just a minute. So now that we've defined single trunk versus multi-trunk and kind of what those are, why would you select one over the other? This really comes down to landscape design and the application that you need that tree for. Is it a shade producing? Does it want to screen property lines? Is it a windbreak? Is it more of just an accent tree and there for aesthetic purposes? So you kind of have to think about what that tree is going to do in your landscape. If it's for shade, you have to think about how much shade you actually want. Is it just going to be a small bistro set for maybe just a couple people, a little picnic? Or do you need the tree to have a more significant amount of shade where you're doing maybe a 6-top table and chairs or something like that? If that is the case, if you need a lot of shade, generally speaking, you might want to consider the single trunk tree. For one, right out of the gate of the nursery, you are going to get, generally speaking, a taller tree than if you were to get a multi-trunk tree in the same container size. So you're getting a little bit more bang for the buck on height. And because of that, you're going to get more instant gratification, a little bit more instant shade shade than you would going with a multi-trunk. That's not to say that eventually the multi-trunk won't get up to the same height as a single trunk would, but it will take a little bit longer to get there. So generally speaking, you will get better canopy coverage right off the bat with a single trunk. Of course, you can use a multi-trunk tree for shade and seating as well, and it's really determined by the ultimate mature size of the tree. But even a large mature multi-trunk tree can have minimal seating capability if the branches are at a more extreme angle. So you're gonna have a hard time getting seating closer in and having a good canopy coverage. Now, let's say you need some property line screening. In that case, you might wanna consider a multi-trunk tree or even a low branching. You're gonna get a little bit better privacy, you're gonna get a little bit better screening because the tree structure is kind of a little bit more fanned out. It's a little bit more thick and dense, and foliage starting a little bit lower versus just the lollipop effect. It'll do more in creating privacy than a single trunk would. Another design scenario to consider: if you are lining trees up in a row and you want uniformity, you have to be careful what tree you are selecting. Some trees will grow more uniform together and they'll be predictable in their growth, versus other trees, whether it be multi-trunk or single trunk, might be more unpredictable in their growth. So it's really important to have a good understanding of what the tree is going to do in its maturity. And some trees will do that much better than others. One tree that grows really unpredictable, a tree that I love, is Tababuya, or pink trumpet tree. I love the flowers. The bark is dark and has a nice contrast to it, but you line 10 of them up and they will each look completely different. Some of them will lean a little bit, some will start branching higher or lower. You know, a lot of that is how they're pruned. You can prune them to be a little bit more uniform, but some are just more irregular by nature, some stay more uniform by nature. So it's really important to understand what the tree is gonna do as it matures. Now, let's talk about placement of your tree, because this is really crucial in selecting multi-trunk versus single trunk. Let's say you have a walkway and you want to have a tree in sort of a closer proximity to that walkway. A multi-trunk tree might crowd the space, whereas a single trunk tree might provide a little bit more headroom. So you want to make sure you have enough space for that human interaction to walk safely and smoothly down a walkway while still experiencing shade and the beauty of a tree. So to better explain what I'm talking about, I want to do a quick little down and dirty sketch for you guys to just kind of help bring it to life a little bit. Here we have a very basic sketch of a single trunk tree and a multi-trunk tree with someone standing in the middle on a pathway. Now, right off the bat, both of these trees might look like they are perfectly suitable for the space. However, in closer examination, look at the plane of each canopy. Look at where the foliage starts on the single trunk tree. The bottom of the canopy starts above the head of the person walking through the space, yet it's far enough away, and it'll still cast some shade on the walkway. Now jump over to the multi-trunk tree. The canopy is generally going to be lower and it encroaches into the space more because the tree is just wider because of the multiple stems. So in this particular design scenario, if we're working with restricted dimensions, then I think the single trunk tree is the way to go. Don't want to get slapped in the face with branches or foliage. And that's not to say you can't keep a multi-trunk nice and tight, but the whole idea of a multi-trunk is to let it branch out and get the full beauty of that trunk structure. Ultimately, you just want to be aware of your space and what is going to fit. And it's also worth noting to be aware of your roof line. If you have a multi-trunk tree that, of course, tends to want to grow out and maybe sort of interfere with the roof line or gutter system or what have you, then you might, again, want to default towards the single trunk, and or just make sure the tree is placed far enough away from the structure. Now, lighting is also worth mentioning. If you're planning any kind of landscape lights, you really want to think about what that light is going to do on whatever tree you are wanting to highlight. And I'm telling you, There is nothing like a beautifully lit multi-trunk tree at night. It is absolutely incredible when it's tastefully done. And I'm not saying single trunks don't look nice, but there's just something about the multi-trunk that just really pops. There's so many other factors that come into play with tree selection. The form of the canopy, is it weeping? Is it upright? Is it open or dense? There's so many things to consider, but this is just hitting the basics, and I really hope it's helped. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, like, subscribe, hit that bell notification so you know when a new video comes out. Let's do this again. Let's sit and hang out, drink coffee, maybe get your cup ready. The next time you sit down and watch a video, get your sketchbook out. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys on the next one, and as always, happy planting.